It's about 5 a.m. I'm waiting for a heart attack case to come in. The early mornings, I think, are when I'm most contemplative. So I just thought I'd share some things I've been thinking about this morning while I'm waiting, which kind of pertain to the job of being a doctor. It's actually been a pretty decent on-call shift, really. Yesterday, we cleared all the waiting in patients by about 6 p.m. I managed to get home to spend the evening with my family. We watched a movie with the kids who are still on holiday. It was a cricket movie, actually. Iqbal. It's basically the Karate Kid, but with cricket. And Daniel is deaf and mute. But it's beautifully acted. It sounds worse than it is, much better than it sounds. It's a nice film. Tucked my kids into bed, and I was only woken up by a call about 4 a.m., this call. And I say all those things together because nobody wants to get out of bed in the early hours, especially on a night like tonight when it's -3 degrees outside and your bed is nice and warm. But I try to use all that as motivation. The patients that the hospital has called me about, they want to get home to their family. They want to get back to their bed. And if I can do something to increase their chances of them doing that, then not only should I want to go, but I should feel privileged to be in that position. And I do, even though I'm still human and nobody wants to get out of bed on a cold night. So once I've dragged myself out, I normally drive to this hospital. I cycle to my other one. And I typically listen to audiobooks or music. But this morning, I just drove in silence, listening to the engine, listening to the sounds of the road. When I got in the car, actually, the stars, and in particular, Venus, Jupiter, Mars, they're so bright. There are so many stars in the sky. And for a city boy like me who spent his life in 2 big cities with poor air, the night sky is still so magical. And I guess that put me in a mood, because I remembered a quote from René Lariche, a French surgeon who wrote in the 1950s that every surgeon carries within himself a small cemetery where he goes from time to pray. It's a place of bitterness and regret where he goes to look for explanations for his failures. That's how it's normally translated from the French, but the original is actually c'est un succès, which I'm not sure is a word in English, in success, but I infer something a bit different in meaning from failure. Failure implies that the doctor made a mistake, which of course happens, but thankfully it's rare. However, all doctors have insuccesses where we are not successful in spite of our efforts. And this morning, I don't know if I visited that cemetery while driving here necessarily, but I did think about one case in particular, the details of which I can't be specific with for obvious reasons, but whom I met before Christmas. Now, I've always been a sort of big advocate for doctors not to allow their jobs to consume them, to treat being a doctor like any other job that you shouldn't take home with you. But reality isn't that convenient. You can't let every case overwhelm you, but some do make a bigger impact than others. And this patient was incredibly unwell. They were also quite young, and they were initially told that nothing could be done and they were going to die fairly soon. But a friend of mine asked for my help, and we transferred the patient to see what we could do. Now, there are different levels of subspecialization. I'm a specialist, a cardiologist, but then I'm a subspecialist in interventional cardiology. And then they needed something even more specialist, something literally only a handful of people in the country can do. So we spent several days, a huge team effort, literally dozens of people trying to save their life. And I'd arranged for a super specialist to do a very unusual operation, but we just needed to help the patient make it there in a good enough state. I met their young family. Again, I can't give details, but something about them kind of affected me personally for specific reasons. And something I've been meaning to make a separate dedicated video about is this trend of news articles saying doctors said should never walk again. Doctors told me I'd only have months to live. And look, I don't know what specific doctors say in around the world, but you hear these stories so often that it sounds like doctors are routinely saying these things and they're spectacularly wrong on a regular basis. Whereas in reality, we have to be guarded in our predictions. We have to manage expectations because it is utterly cruel to get someone's or their family's hopes up only for them to be disappointed. So we'll always prefer to be seen as pessimistic and proved wrong than be overly optimistic and then see people's hopes get dashed. So I explained that we were going to try this, but that their loved one remains critically unwell. And perhaps because they had been told that all hope was lost, they looked so happy. They thanked me for not giving up. And I felt bad, actually, because I still knew the chances of them making it were so slim. And yet, privately, I also felt optimistic. I'd allowed myself to hope. And I don't think that's a mistake. I think it should be a private thing. I don't think you should show that to the family necessarily, but it's only natural that the hope that you have for every patient sometimes spills over into kind of wishful thinking and optimism. So I finished my week, I handed over, I went away. I had a nice Christmas with my family. That super specialist texted me some days later asking for an update because he was planning on transferring the patient and he didn't know that I'd handed over. I was no longer covering the ward. But I also wanted to know, so I called up my colleague, and that was when I found out that the patient had died a few hours earlier. I wondered if there was anything I could have done differently, including the things I'd said. I hope, once the intense grief has passed, that their family will know that we did our best, but I don't think that would be any comfort. Sometimes the best is not enough. I, was still at home over the Christmas period, and I'm not saying that I fixated on it or anything counterproductive, but I definitely reflected on it and thought of the case often. I've been doing this job a long time now, and this is going to sound like a fairly weird flex, but I feel pretty on top of things from a mental health point of view, and I feel I manage stress well. I don't really get stressed. If a doctor allows every death of a patient under their care to get to them, they're not going to be able to function either as a doctor nor as a human being. No sympathy required here. This is the life we chose. But if one takes it too far and loses all humanity or emotion, as is often caricatured in TV medical dramas, the kind of cold, detached, unfeeling doctor that occasionally I do see younger doctors trying to emulate. They think that's the way forward. Then actually motivating yourself to get out of bed at 4 a.m. on an icy morning is all that much harder. By visiting that small cemetery, we reflect on the decisions we make. Some cases do linger in the mind longer than others, and perhaps those are the graves we visit most often. I'm not really sure why I recorded this. It's not my usual style, but I guess that sort of starry sky and the empty roads in the dark made me quite pensive. I get a lot of emails from medical students or people who want to become doctors, and I always thought that I gave the impression that it's not especially a career that I'd recommend. It's a special career, but it's not one for everyone. And I see how low morale is now among resident doctors. Over the Christmas period, every single resident doctor in our team called in sick. I had to actually cancel my leave and come in to help a colleague. And I'm sure this is because flu is rampaging through the country at the moment. Lots of patients and staff have flu. But it made me think that sick leave in general has skyrocketed in recent years, in no small part due to mental health. And I hate seeing that the doctors at a stage where I was maybe 10 years ago are not enjoying the job as much as I did. So I guess I wanted to say that this career is special and unique. And although there are mountains of BS to navigate and endure, the ability to save a life and affect many more is something that's hard to explain, and it does make it all worthwhile. It really is an incredible privilege. So being mindful of the impression of this job that I might give online, I also wanted to document for those who might be considering it, that even on early mornings when you are lost in contemplation at your insuccès, it can offer a deep sense of purpose. I feel it especially in the line that I've chosen, where the rewards can be instantaneous and dramatic, such as stopping a massive heart attack and rescuing a patient in cardiac arrest. But the risks and complications can be just as dramatically catastrophic and immediate. And these all feature in our small cemetery, but every field of medicine has its highs and lows. Sorry, no jokes in this one. I'll try to put some in the next video. But until then, Happy New Year. No matter how good or bad your 2024 was, I hope your 2025 is better. All right, let me end with this then, because the worst possible thing has happened. There's nothing worse than finishing a grueling night shift, well, not grueling, and seeing the day shift people coming on, fresh-faced. It's disgusting. I think that it should be illegal. We shouldn't have to overlap with them. This is some bullshit.